Alright guys, so I got a couple different Israel updates that I want to get to here. We're going to start off with Kamala Harris demanding an immediate ceasefire. I'm going to explain to you guys exactly what she actually means by that. We're also going to talk about the United States deciding to circumvent Israel's blockade of humanitarian aid getting into Gaza and deciding to airdrop aid directly to the people of Gaza, so I'm going to talk about that. And then we're also going to finish off with Israeli settlers going to the border of Gaza and straight up setting up, makeshift settlements in their attempt to resettle Gaza amidst this ongoing genocidal campaign. So here to start us off is Kamala Harris. Okay, now she did this little speech here at, I guess this was in Selma, Alabama, and a lot of people were misinterpreting what she said here. So let's just go ahead and roll the clip, and then I'll explain exactly what's actually going on here.
And given the immense scale of suffering in Gaza, there must be an immediate ceasefire. For at least the next 6 weeks, which is what is currently on the table. This will get the hostages out and get a significant amount of aid in. This would allow us to build something more enduring, to ensure Israel is secure, and to respect the right of the Palestinian people to dignity, freedom, and self-determination.
Okay, so a couple of different things here. First off, who the hell was in this crowd, right? Who is that excited for Kamala Harris? I want to meet that man. Okay, but now on to more of the substantive things, right? So first off, when Kamala Harris says she wants an immediate ceasefire, halt, pause for applause, right, and roaring cheers from the crowd there, and then immediately after says, for approximately 6 weeks, right, what does she mean by that? Well, what she's describing here is what Democrats used to call a humanitarian pause in the fighting, okay? And then after an immense amount of pressure from their own base, from the American people, calling for an actual long-standing permanent ceasefire, Democrats decided to shift their language. And now they're trying to basically come out with this ploy to claim that they're in favor of a ceasefire, even though what they mean is a temporary weeks-long pause in the fighting, after which Israel can then go in and continue with their genocide. That's what she's actually describing here. So it's incredibly warped and dishonest for anybody who's looking at this clip, as I was seeing, on my Twitter feed, coming out and pretending as if, like, this is Kamala Harris, going rogue, she's breaking from Biden, she's putting all this pressure on Israel to get a ceasefire. No, this message was not directed towards Israel. This message was directed towards Hamas, okay? The narrative that she's trying to sell here is that Israel and the United States are on the same page, they both want a ceasefire, and that it's Hamas that has been blocking it, right? Keeping in mind that the United States of America has vetoed, okay, 3 different United Nations Security Council resolutions calling for an immediate ceasefire. Keeping in mind that Israel just recently, a couple weeks ago, rejected a Hamas proposal that would have, over a months-long sort of like multi-stage process, resulted in the return of every single hostage out of Gaza, and also resulted in the Israeli forces withdrawing from the Gaza Strip and actually providing for a long-term sort of ceasefire proposal that is lasting instead of just a couple of weeks. Israel rejected that, right? So, I mean, the idea that they're coming out now and they're going to try to pretend as if, no, we've actually been in favor of a ceasefire this entire time. It's actually just Hamas that has been obstructionist in this process. It's utterly absurd. And this is no different than what Joe Biden has been floating over the last couple of weeks, right? This is nothing new. This is nothing revelatory. This is nothing, crazy that she's saying here. This is the proposal. This is the idea that they are floating right now, which is something that I think they know that Hamas is not likely to agree with, right? If you have 2 different partners that are coming to the table to negotiate a ceasefire, if a part of that ceasefire deal is that Hamas gives up all of their leverage by returning all of the hostages, which, again, I think all of the hostages should be returned home. But if the deal at the negotiating table is Hamas gives up all of their leverage, returns all of the hostages, and then after a couple of weeks, Israel goes back into Gaza or stays in Gaza and continues to try to remove Hamas from power, continues in this genocidal war and kills thousands of more innocent Palestinian civilians, that's not exactly something that they're likely to agree to, right? And so I think what this really more so is than actually pushing for a permanent ceasefire in Gaza, what it actually is just like a convenient excuse for them to come out and to pretend as if they're in favor of a ceasefire, and that it's not Israel, it's not the United States that has been obstructionist in that, it's actually Hamas, right? Which is delusional if you've been keeping up with everything that they have been saying and doing over the last number of months. Now, another point that was brought up here by Abed, he says that Vice President Harris calling for a six-week temporary ceasefire is a very specific amount of time. In fact, it's just enough time to get most of the Democratic primaries out of the way. After April 15th, there are only a handful of primaries left, with the longest or the largest being in Pennsylvania on April 23rd. What she's asked for isn't a ceasefire, it is a pause to the genocide. So I think he's correct on that, obviously. But whether or not this is some sort of like a cynical ploy to get through the Democratic primaries, given what we just saw in Michigan with a substantial portion of the Democratic base going out, making the effort to go to the polls to vote uncommitted in protest of Biden's handling of Israel and Gaza, I don't know. You guys tell me, is this more a cynical ploy, or is this them just sort of like shifting rhetoric amidst, massive pressure from their base? I don't know. But it's certainly not a long-standing ceasefire, okay? And so now we move on to this. The Israeli minister, Benny Gantz, is apparently setting up to meet, I think it's today, with Biden's advisors Brett McGurk, Jake Sullivan as well at the White House, and later he's going to meet with Kamala Harris. And at the entrance he said, "With friends, we need to speak openly, and this is what I am going to do." So this was kind of interesting for a number of different reasons, because apparently Netanyahu and a lot of the rest of the Israeli government that's currently in power didn't want him to go and do this trip. He kind of went a little bit rogue and decided to do this by himself. Now, what exactly that means, I can't say. I guess it depends on what exactly they talk about within these meetings. So we'll stay on top of that and try to see what comes out of it. But this isn't some like peacenik from Israel who's coming over here to try to negotiate an end to the war and to push Netanyahu out of power and to be a real check on him and to give, security and rights to the Palestinian people or anything remotely resembling that. I mean, this is the same Benny Gantz who, recently, just in the last couple of months, back in late December, he was threatening to intensify military action against Hezbollah, right? So this is a guy who was actually pushing to expand the war in Gaza, to not just be in Gaza and the West Bank, but to also be in Lebanon as well. So, again, I don't know what's going to come from those meetings. I just think it's interesting that he decided to come over here and do those meetings, which apparently upset Netanyahu. You also have reportedly a bunch of high-ranking, commander spokespeople in the Israeli military that have resigned recently. So it's definitely a lot of tension over there in the Israeli war cabinet amidst all of this, as you sort of have competing pressures of guys like Benny Gantz and, guys like Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich and Netanyahu trying to like balance the scales desperately to keep himself in power, because, knowing that his political and potentially even like, his freedom may be at stake, not only just his political career, but also his direct freedom from some of the, charges that have been brought against him, that's all on the table if this war ends, right? His political career ends when this war ends, effectively. So he has every incentive to continue this, to escalate this. There are guys around him who are pulling him in every which, direction, which none of the directions are honestly good, but it's an interesting thing to, keep our eye on. Now we move on to this. The United States of America, Joe Biden, has decided to go around the Israeli blockade of humanitarian aid, which they've been holding up on the border of Gaza for months now. There have been many different humanitarian aid organizations who have done extensive reporting on this. There are hundreds of trucks, if not thousands, that are on the border of Gaza that are ready to go in, and they've been holding up upwards of like 70% of the aid. I gave you guys previous comparisons where even before October 7th, because of Israel's blockade of Gaza before October 7th, they were already requiring upwards of like 500 trucks a day to sustain the population there, barely sustain the population there. And, right now they're averaging about less than 100 trucks that are getting into Gaza as the humanitarian situation has drastically worsened in the meantime. So obviously not enough aid is getting into Gaza. Obviously Israel is responsible for that dynamic. We've also covered the stories of Israeli civilians going and protesting aid, setting up bouncy castles and handing out popcorn and candy to people who are willing to go and protest and block more of the aid from getting into Gaza. So we know that Israel is responsible for that, and the United States is choosing to go out of their way to directly airdrop aid to the people of Gaza. So a couple of different things on this. Number one, obviously the fundamental question here is, what does this say about Israel, right? Because the United States government is not openly coming out and admitting and calling out or criticizing Israel for holding up the aid, right? But you are simultaneously, as you are not willing to call them out on that, you are forced to go and do these airdrops of aid packages to the people of Gaza in order to get around the Israeli blockade. So what you have here is a roundabout sort of like tacit admission that Israel is intentionally starving the people of Gaza, because otherwise there's no reason why you would need to do this kind of an airdrop. unless Israel was choosing to not allow in sufficient aid, many of which was sent by the United States. And keep in mind, we saw, Israeli ministers like Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister, who directly was blocking U.S. shipments of flour to Gaza. So it's not like Israel is blockading weapons from getting into Gaza. No, they're blocking food and water and medical supplies, basic necessities that people desperately need right now, as hundreds of thousands are facing starvation, right? And so that's what that says about just the U.S. sort of accidentally admitting that Israel is intentionally starving the people of Gaza, right? So that's number one. Number two is that if you actually look at the details of this, right, down here they say they dropped over 38,000 meals along the coastline of Gaza. 38,000 meals. So you just provided 38,000 people one meal for one day in a population of 2.2 million, basically all of whom need this kind of aid to be delivered on a regular basis. So the reality of this is that this is basically, I think, not only just an admission of what I was talking about before, but it's also completely insufficient. And they know it's insufficient. And so it's kind of just a virtue signal here. To be like, well, look at us. We're being humanitarian. We're sending a ratio of maybe 10 bombs to every piece of bread that we give the people of Gaza. And so, aren't we so humanitarian in our approach? But I mean, again, 38,000 meals. It's a population of 2 million people. So the idea that this is ever going to be enough, of course it's not. Now, of course, they say that they're going to continue these aid shipments, but this is never going to be able to replace the land, deliveries that could be going into Gaza. It's never going to be enough. Logistically, it's not possible to airdrop the amounts of aid that the people of Gaza need. So the actual solution here would be to ramp up drastically the pressure on Israel, not just for a ceasefire, but also to open up their borders to allow all of this aid to flood into Gaza. And so, I mean, the idea that this is something that they're doing out of the kindness of their hearts, I mean, it's utterly ridiculous. I just saw another recent story that The Weeknd, right, this pop star, The Weeknd, apparently donated, the equivalent in $2.5 million or whatever his official donation was, the equivalent of 100 times more meals than what was just airdropped in this one shipment, right? So the idea that this is some max capacity, the U.S. is doing everything they can to prevent Israel's starvation of the people of Gaza, no, of course not. And again, it's logistically never going to be enough. Also pointed out here by Ian Bremmer, he says this will be the first time in United States history that they are airdropping humanitarian aid because one of its closest allies has otherwise blockaded it, right? So we've done airdrops before of humanitarian aid in different various war zones throughout recent history, but never, at least to my knowledge, has there been a situation where we have had to go around one of our closest allies in order to deliver aid because that close ally of ours is actively blowing up and starving that population. So, I mean, the dynamics of this are utterly insane. We also have a video here of what some of this actually looks like, which gives you an idea in terms of the chaotic nature of all of this, right? We obviously just recently saw Israel massacre over 100 people who were desperately trying to go to one of the food aid convoys inside of Gaza, and I'll touch on a couple of updates we have on that here in a second. But I mean, this is not anywhere close to a legitimate plan for delivering aid to Gaza. I mean, you're just dumping things from parachutes from the sky into the ocean, and then you just haphazardly have a bunch of people who are having to run into the ocean to retrieve them, right? So not only is it not enough in scale, but also this may contribute to the chaos on the ground. All because you are not willing to confront Israel for blockading the actual aid that should and could be getting into Gaza. So it's pathetic. Now, we also had Joe Biden here, who, of course, gave us another quick little perspective on his age, his senility here when he was announcing this. Let's go ahead and watch this.
In the coming days, we're going to join with our friends in Jordan and others in providing airdrops of additional food and supplies into Ukraine and seek to continue to open up other avenues into Ukraine, including...
Okay. So, he misspoke, right? He said Ukraine. He meant to say Gaza. Do with that what you will. I don't really know what more to say about it. The dude is lost in the sauce, okay? Now we get to John Kirby, who is confronted about why the U.S. is still so supportive of Israel when it is causing the starvation inside of Gaza, and was questioned about the airdrops. Let's go ahead and watch a little bit of this.
That will be part of this airdrop, or these airdrops. And I'm kind of curious about that because those are risks that the United States now has to take on for itself, conducting those airdrops. The reason those risks now fall to the United States is because Israel is starving those people. So why are we still so supportive of Israel when it is the one that is creating the problem that the United States now has to try to ameliorate?
Israel itself has tried to help with the delivery of humanitarian assistance. As I said, they tried airdrops themselves just a week or so ago on their own accord.
So why are so many people still starving?
It's a war zone, and there's nowhere else for them to go. It's not like in some other conflicts where they can easily flee. And let's not forget how this started. Okay, there'd be no need for airdrops if Hamas hadn't chosen to break what was a ceasefire in place on the 6th of October. So let's not forget how this started. There is a need. Many people are in desperate need of food, water, medicine, and fuel. And the United States was and remains and will continue to be the leading provider of humanitarian assistance to them. And we take that responsibility.
Okay, so completely dodged the question. Gives these bullshit justifications like, well, what about October 7th, right? Oh, Hamas broke this ceasefire. First of all, were there war crimes committed by Hamas on October 7th? Yeah, absolutely. Does that give Israel a justification to go commit 100 times the war crimes in Gaza? No, absolutely fucking not. So to bring up October 7th, oh, Hamas started it. Okay, and? I mean, it's like saying like, well, my little brother slapped me in the face, so I shot him with an AR-15. I mean, that's not exactly a good justification there that you're giving. Right? But on top of that, I mean, the other portions of this explanation, oh, the United States has been desperately trying to get humanitarian aid in. We're the #1 provider of humanitarian aid to Gaza. I don't know if that's even a true statement, but this is the same country, along with many other Western governments around the world, that just recently, and still to this day, has cut off funding to UNRWA, the UNRWA, that is the primary, organizational capacity to supply the people of Gaza with the aid that they desperately need. You cut their aid based on unproven, zero evidence provided claims from the Israeli intelligence services that some tiny fraction of UNRWA employees were in some way, shape, or form connected to October 7th. So the idea that you guys, oh, we're desperately trying to get humanitarian aid in, Israel is desperately trying to get humanitarian aid in, but it's just so difficult. It's fucking bullshit. I mean, it is just so obviously bullshit at face value that I don't even know how he can stand up there with a straight face and think that this is going to be convincing to anybody who's actually paying attention to what's been going on. I mean, it's pathetic. The only thing I could think about with these aid drops is this old picture of Donald Trump, obviously, when he was tossing out, the paper towel rolls here to people who had just suffered this massive, catastrophic environmental disaster. I think it was in Puerto Rico at the time. And he goes out there and he tosses paper towels into the crowd like he's shooting hoops or something. This is what this comes across to me as for the Biden administration. 38,000 meals for 1.9 million people. It's actually closer to 2.2 million people, but point stands. I mean, it's just utterly pathetic and embarrassing. We also had this point that was made here by Assault Rod. I'm so tired of Biden officials acting like we're idiots. You can't arm and fund Israel, draw no red lines, veto UN resolutions, reject the International Court of Justice, cut UNRWA funding, ignore international law, and then say that you're helping the dire humanitarian crisis that you created. Yeah, people see your lies. I mean, this is what they've been doing. The idea that, yeah, we're going to cut funding to the major humanitarian aid organization based on unproven allegations. We're going to veto United Nations Security Council resolutions calling for an immediate ceasefire. We're going to openly say, as John Kirby personally previously said, that there are no red lines for Israel's offensive. I mean, we're going to continue trying to give them billions of dollars in arms shipments and otherwise aid support, as if they even fucking need it in the first place. And then turn around and drop 38,000 meals on the people of Gaza, who are starving because of your support for Israel's genocide there, and then turn around and pretend as if you're the good guys. I mean, get the fuck out of here. Is anybody buying this? Now, again, moving on to this, we also had an update here on the recent, what's being called the Flower Massacre in Gaza. And I didn't know this at the time when I showed you guys this original video. I had other criticisms for it at the time, but it came out that this video that was released by the IDF that was basically intended to show the people of Gaza who were trying desperately to get to this aid because they are being starved by Israel. And they put this video out basically framing it as like, look at these massive hordes of, criminals who are looting these aid trucks, and aren't they so terrible? And then it turns out that this video was massively edited. And the way that they edited it was, they showed the people surrounding the convoys, and then they cut out the part where Israel starts shooting at these people, and then you can see in the video people start taking cover, and then after that they cut back in, and then you see people in a sort of like mad rush to get away, right? So Israel's claim about what happened in this massacre is that a bunch of Palestinians looted these aid trucks and killed each other because they were all stampeding over each other to try to go loot these aid trucks. And then some of them broke away and approached the IDF in a scary way, and so then the IDF fired on some of them, right? That's the line of logic that they're going with. When in reality what happened here is that Israel sent this convoy, knowing that this kind of a situation was likely to develop. They sent this convoy into a starving population. The starving population then goes to try to get this aid directly because they're being starved by Israel. And then Israel decides to shoot at this convoy and to kill dozens of people. Then there is a mad rush. Then people start taking cover and fleeing. And about 80% from what we've seen from hospital reports in Gaza, 80% of the wounded and the killed that they've seen at these hospitals were killed by Israeli fire, whether bullets or tank shells or shrapnel. About 20 or so percent were killed as a part of this stampede. But in either case, the stampede was caused because Israel fired into this crowd. So any way you want to analyze what the fuck just happened, you had the IDF put a bunch of aid in this area in the middle of a starving population and then massacre the people who went to try to get that aid. That's what happened here. And then they selectively edited a video and put it out to try to form the narrative that, oh, it's actually these people's fault. They all just trampled each other. Oh, we didn't shoot at them, right? Oh, it was only these dangerous people who broke off and rushed at the IDF that then we shot at them. I mean, the lies are so comical and so astounding. I mean, we've seen them repeatedly, but Jesus fucking Christ, man. Keeping up with the amount of lies has been virtually impossible. Even for somebody like me who covers this on a daily basis. And I think that I track almost everything that comes out about Israel and Gaza. But keeping up with the lies, I couldn't even put together an accurate, count of all of the lies, egregious lies that we have seen since October 7th. Now, we also had this. Now, even with the blur, this is a pretty gruesome image to be looking at, right? But this was a report that was put out by Euromed Human Rights Monitor. Israeli tanks have deliberately run over dozens of Palestinians alive. So I've seen the uncensored version of this. Don't look it up. It's not worth looking at. It's absolutely horrific, as horrific as you could possibly imagine. But this is apparently a routine occurrence for the IDF. I mean, in this specific instance, they talk about this man who was deliberately run over in Gaza City's Al Zaytun neighborhood on February 29th after he was arrested. The man was subjected to harsh interrogation by members of the IDF, who bound his hands with plastic zip tie handcuffs before running over him with a military vehicle from the bottom to the top of his body. What the fuck do you even say at this point? How do you do an analysis of this? We're not doing an analysis of a war that's going back and forth, right? Where two sides are battling it out on the front lines and, trying to do an analysis from an actual battle standpoint. We're witnessing just a mass slaughter, indiscriminate mass slaughter of innocent civilians in the most gruesome and horrific ways that you could possibly imagine. And I can't even show you guys 10% of what I've seen. I mean, this is maybe the worst that I could show you guys on YouTube, and I'm sure that this video is going to get demonetized anyways, even with the blur. But I can't even show you guys half the shit that I see because of how gruesome and horrific and egregious all of it is. And so now we move on to this, because literally just days after the Flower Massacre took place, they did it again. Here from Al Jazeera, the Israeli military has targeted Palestinians waiting for flower trucks near the Kuwaiti roundabout in Gaza City. Health Ministry says that dozens of people have been killed and injured, and this is Al Jazeera reporting on it. So days after this, days after they come up with all of these lies and spin and, oh, we would never just massacre people who were going to get flour, you did it again. You did it again. And this wasn't the first time. This wasn't the second time. I mean, countless times we've seen them attack people who were trying to go and get aid. This isn't like a few bad apples. This isn't breaking away from the norm. This is the norm. This is what the IDF views as a part of their military strategy. Point blank period. And I'll finish off with this again. So we've gotten to the point now where many of these same protesters who I've covered, again, setting up bouncy castles and popcorn and candy and all of that for the people who are blocking humanitarian aid from getting to a starving population in Gaza, they're also now escalating to the point where they're actually trying to set up settlements inside of Gaza. Let's go ahead and watch a little bit of this here from Al Jazeera.
We came here to declare that the day after this war is over, we must settle, we must spread Jewish towns all over the Gaza Strip.
Okay, so, I don't know if you could even possibly ask for a more straight up, to the point explanation of exactly what a lot of people in Israel view this war as, right? And it's not just random people who you're interviewing on the side of the street. I mean, listen, I'll pull this back up here, right? These are some of the people who are just doing that. And who's this over here? Oh, that's an IDF soldier who is on the border with them, allowing them to do this, right? But it's not even just the soldiers. It's not even just the civilians. It's not even just the most far-right settlers in Israel who are trying to do this. It's also guys who are high up in the Netanyahu coalition. Guys like Itamar Ben-Gvir, guys like Bezalel Smotrich, who have gone to conferences where they openly talk about resettling Gaza, okay? And in the meantime, by the way, the Israeli Knesset has, under the directive of Netanyahu and his government coalition, have approved the settlements of thousands of different settlements inside of the West Bank, just in the last couple of weeks. So as all of this genocide is happening inside of Gaza, Israel is also taking this opportunity, as people are more focused on Gaza, to dramatically expand their settler colonial project in the West Bank to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians living there. So that's all happening in the meantime of all of this. And I feel like it's very important to focus on that, because it gives you a perspective that this is not just a fucking targeted operation against Hamas. This is Israel who is continuing with this long-standing ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people that has been going on for decades. The idea that in that earlier SOT that we watched, that John Kirby would come out and say, well, all of this is on Hamas because they violated a ceasefire that was in place, right? On October 7th, they violated the ceasefire that was in place on October 6th. He knows damn well that before October 7th, 2023 was the deadliest year in modern history for Palestinians in the West Bank. He knew that. He knows that that's actually the dynamic of what's going on here. So, I mean, this is not going anywhere, guys. The Israeli government, and it's not just Netanyahu, it's not just Smotrich, it's not just Itamar Ben-Gvir, it is the Israeli government broadly. It is their entire state apparatus that is geared towards a genocide in Gaza, that is geared towards a slow-rolling ethnic cleansing in the West Bank, that is geared towards maintaining and expanding their apartheid nature inside of Israel proper. This is what the U.S. government is supporting. And so when Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, whenever any of these ghouls come out, they try to justify it, try to give their spin, they try to claim, oh, well, we're desperately working to get aid in, we're desperately working to get a ceasefire in place. It's utter bullshit. And you got to understand everything that's going on, unfortunately, in order to seep through that bullshit to get to the truth.